I was in kind of the throes of this depression after I left the show. But what a lot of people don't understand is that during the show, the internet was beginning to internet, and the world decided, or a large portion of the world decided that I had died.
Right. This was a big deal. This was a meme. I remember hearing about this. Or else that you were like a heroin addict and that you were...
I was a dead heroin addict.
Okay.
I had died of an overdose, and I had died of suicide, which is not what you want to hear when you're severely clinically depressed. Or the one was that I had wrapped a Dodge Charger around a tree or something, which is insane because I would not ever drive a Charger.
You know it. Please.
No, please.
Come on.
It's a cop car.
Yeah.
But when a gazillion people you've never met tell you that you're dead, it's bad when you're severely clinically depressed. And there was nothing I could do about this rumor. I mean, Nickelodeon didn't like it either. So I would go on the Rosie O'Donnell show and be like, hi, I'm still alive. And everyone thought I was dead. I was on like one talk show where I danced with Busta Rhymes and people still thought I was like, what else do you have to do?
That's a Steve Burns impersonator.
Exactly. Right. And after I left the show, this rumor continued, and it was one of the most common things people would say to me was, I thought you were dead.
Wow. Yeah.
And after the show ended, that's when alcohol became a thing in my life. I built a house in Brooklyn and never left it. Right. I call it the gray hum of my life. There was about 10 years where I did nothing but like drink a couple bottles of wine every night alone, watch Mythbusters. Not that that's a bad thing to do. That's a wonderful thing to do, actually. And you just eat pad thai. Like I gained like 50 pounds. I was completely unrecognizable. I didn't recognize me. And everyone thought I was dead. And eventually I started playing along. That was the strategy, was just, maybe I am, it's a weird.
Were you doing anything to get help at that time?
No. And
did you have friends that were worried about you reaching out?
Yes.
Interventions?
Almost. See, that was the thing, is I never quite got bad enough. I was always very manageable on the outside. But a lot of it is about the internet, because I don't think any of us were, I know I wasn't prepared for the kind of manufactured consensus the towering consensus of a gazillion people.
Yeah.
And we now live in this world where something demonstrably false becomes true.
Yep.
Through consensus.
And something demonstrably true becomes false.
Becomes less interesting than another narrative that is invested in and becomes truth.
It is a much more interesting narrative that climate change has been created by liberal academics in their ivory castles, and is an excuse to increase government overreach.
That's a highly entertaining conspiracy.
That's a fabulous story. And the inconvenient truth that humanity for 200 years has been belching up all this CO2 into the atmosphere is just not as interesting.
It's harder to parse. It's harder to understand. It's complex. There's consequences to that. It's easier to believe the other narrative.
Yeah.
My continued existence was an inconvenient truth, apparently, and when you've just kind of, mental health is kind of like a garden in my mind, and it can just get weedy. And mine was weedy as fuck.
And was the internet contributing to that? Were you spending way too much time on it? Yeah.
I learned never to Google myself, but there was something I would hear from people. Oh, I thought you were dead. Didn't you die?
Yeah.
And you start to think, when a rumor like that persists for 3 or 4 years, it stops being funny. When it persists for 10 years, it feels like a cultural preference.
Right.
Which
does the world prefer me dead?
Yeah. When it persists for 15 or 20 years, you start to feel like you're supposed to be.
That's heartbreaking.
Being an urban legend in that way is a thing that I think is difficult for almost anyone else in the world to understand.
Yeah.
And it it messed me up. It was not a good, it was not a good stressor.
I have been the victim of fake deaths on the internet several times. One time I was working and I was shooting and my mom was calling me over and over and over again. And finally I picked up the phone, like, what's going on? And she's like, oh, thank God you're okay. I read on the internet you were dead. Oh, you had fallen off a cliff in New Zealand.
Yeah, my mother called me crying in line from an Arby's.
What the fuck was your mom doing at an Arby's?
I grew up in Pennsylvania, dude. We were at Arby's a lot.
Yeah, limited choices.
Don't shit on Arby's.
Well, Pennsylvania is the home of, is it Wawa or what's the other one?
Wawa.
And Sheetz.
Turkey Hill. And Sheetz. Yeah, sure.
Sheetz is pretty amazing. You go into Sheetz, the sandwiches.
I'd rather be in a Wawa than a Sheetz, my friend.
Sometimes they're across the street from each other.
I know.
You would choose Wawa over Sheetz?
That's a precarious situation. It's irresponsible.
Hashtag Team Sheetz here.
Oof. I liked you so much.
Yeah.
This started out so well.
All right.
Throw.
So your mom called you from an Arby's.
Yeah. So the death rumor was not great.
Yeah.
But it was something that I internalized and accepted. That's the other thing about depression is eventually you accept it and you identify with it. And that's when you're in trouble. That's when you're an astronaut floating toward a black hole.
And how did you get out of that?
Well, my father died and I was very involved with his caretaking. And I was also in a terrible relationship at that time that ended at that time. And I just blew a gasket and lost my mind. I remember I was in a hospital with my dad getting some stuff done. And there was in the room, in the bed next to us, there was a youngerish family. I guess not that young. This guy was very much an analog of mine. He was kind of my age, and he had a couple kids on his lap that were very happy that he was doing better. His wife was there and they were all crying and happy. And I thought, oh God, I am sitting here, trying as best I can to be the best son I can. I am no one's father. This is crazy. And I don't like how I feel all the time. And I can't do this, and I broke down. I remember I just started running laps around the hospital. I started running and eventually I was screaming and running, and it was shortly after that, out of necessity, because I had responsibilities. I was like, I have to do something. And that's when, it just sounds so trite every time I say this, but it's true. That is when Steve became my teacher, right? It's so woo-woo to say, but it's real.
Yeah, I get that.
Every day on Blue's Clues, I would sit in a chair and look at someone in the eye and ask, will you help me?
Ah, wow.
Right?
Right.
And it wasn't until I did that in my life, in my real life, that things changed.
The Soul Boom Podcast. Subscribe now on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you get your stupid podcasts.